A human baby is the most helpless animal on the planet. It can't walk, can't grip, can't regulate its own temperature. Left alone on flat ground for an hour, it dies. And we've known this for as long as we've existed. So for 300,000 years, no baby was ever left alone. Not once. The idea would have been unthinkable. Tonight somewhere, a parent will put a newborn in a quiet room, close the door, and call it safe. That baby's nervous system will register it as an emergency. Because for almost every moment of human history, alone in the dark meant one thing: dead by morning. How our ancestors actually kept their children alive is a story that rewrites almost everything we think we know about family, instinct, and what we were built to do. Every other primate comes into the world with something a human baby doesn't have: the ability to hold on. A newborn chimpanzee grips its mother's fur within seconds of birth. It clings, it hangs, it moves when she moves. A foal is on its feet within hours. Even the young of much simpler animals are mobile, self-directed, capable of something. A human baby can't lift its own head. It can't regulate its own temperature. Of all the creatures on Earth with a backbone, a human newborn is the least equipped to survive independently. And the reason for that is the thing that supposedly makes us special: the brain. The human brain is the most metabolically expensive organ in the animal kingdom, and it doesn't stop growing. The problem is the pelvis. When our ancestors shifted to walking upright, the pelvis restructured itself around a different center of gravity. It narrowed. It became optimized for a two-legged stride. But the brain kept expanding, which meant the skull housing it kept expanding too. And at some point, those two facts collided into a problem with no clean solution. A fully developed human brain, grown to the same relative size as a chimpanzee's at birth, would never pass through the birth canal that bipedalism created. So the compromise evolution landed on was brutal in its simplicity: get the baby out before the head becomes impossible to deliver. A chimpanzee is born with roughly 40% of its adult brain already built. A human baby arrives at 25%. That gap, that missing 75%, gets filled in over years of total dependence outside the womb in a world that doesn't slow down to accommodate it. For the first year of life, a human infant is essentially a fetus that got evicted early. The nervous system is still wiring, the immune system is still assembling, the bones in the skull haven't fully closed yet, the baby is not ready, and it won't be ready for years. That's the cost of the most powerful brain on the planet. And in a world running with leopards, hyenas, and snakes that could smell something small and warm from a distance, that cost was very nearly fatal. The answer wasn't strength. It wasn't speed or size or any physical advantage. The answer was other people. In 2009, anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy made an argument that reframed everything scientists thought they understood about human child rearing. Her book, Mothers and Others, laid out the case that humans are cooperative breeders, a category of animal that raises young not through the effort of one or two individuals, but through the coordinated investment of a whole group. This isn't how other great apes work. A chimpanzee mother carries her infant alone, feeds it alone, and guards it alone for 5 full years before her body is ready to carry another one. If anyone else in the group reaches for her baby, she pulls it back. Contact from others is a threat, not a resource. Humans are wired almost exactly opposite to that, and Hrdy's argument was that this difference isn't cultural, it's biological. Without the calories and protection that came from shared caregiving, the metabolic cost of building a human brain inside a body that couldn't protect itself would have wiped the species out long before we got here. What that actually looked like on the ground is almost impossible to picture from inside a modern house. Among the FA foragers living in the Ituri forest of the Congo, researchers observed something that stops most people cold. In a single 8-hour period, the average infant was held by 14 different people, not passed around occasionally, transferred arms roughly 8 times every hour. The mother accounted for about 40% of that contact. The other 60%, her child was in someone else's hands entirely. Aunts, older siblings, grandmothers, women with no blood relation to the child at all, some of whom put the baby to their own breast. Among the Aka people of Central Africa, fathers stayed within arm's reach of their infants more than 47% of the day. Not as an act of modern egalitarianism, as a baseline fact of life, the way humans had always lived. The baby was never set down. Part of that was logistical. Bipedalism stripped away the body hair that primate infants used to cling, so a human mother had nothing for her baby to grip. Carrying wasn't optional, it was the only way to keep the infant attached to a living body. They built tools for it, slings stitched from animal hide and woven plant fiber, and archaeologists have found evidence of this going back at least 10,000 years. A burial site in Italy uncovered an infant called Neve, laid to rest with what researchers identified as a decorated carrier. The technology of keeping a baby close is older than agriculture, older than cities, older than writing. And the biology backed it up in ways that are still running inside every infant alive today. When a baby is picked up and held against a body that's moving, something switches off, heart rate drops, breathing evens out, crying stops. Scientists call it the transport response, and it's not comfort in the way we usually mean that word. It's a survival circuit. A crying infant in the open is a signal, audible to anything hunting nearby. A baby that goes quiet the instant it's lifted is a baby that doesn't announce itself to predators. That reflex didn't develop because caregivers found it convenient. It developed because infants who had it lived and infants who didn't. Feeding ran on the same logic of collective survival. Breastfeeding lasted 2 to 4 years at minimum, sometimes longer, because there was no alternative that kept a baby alive. No formula, no safe water, no processed food soft enough for an infant's digestive system. Milk was sterile, complete, and packed with antibodies at a time when any infection could be fatal. It also kept ovulation suppressed, which meant a mother nursing around the clock was unlikely to conceive again for years. 2 helpless infants simultaneously in the Paleolithic wasn't double the responsibility. It was roughly double the chance of losing both. And when the baby was old enough to need something more solid, the group solved that too. Whoever was holding the child, mother, grandmother, older sibling, chewed the food first, broke it down with their own saliva, and passed it mouth to mouth. Some anthropologists believe this is where human kissing began, not as an expression of desire, as the earliest form of feeding someone you were responsible for keeping alive. There's one piece of this that most people don't see coming. In almost every animal species, lifespan tracks reproductive capacity. Once a body can no longer produce offspring, there's no evolutionary pressure to keep it running. It ages, it fails, it stops. But human women live for decades past the point when reproduction ends. No other great ape does this. For a long time, nobody had a satisfying explanation for why. In 1997, anthropologist Kristen Hawkes published findings from her fieldwork with the Hadza of Tanzania, one of the few remaining hunter-gatherer populations on Earth. What she found was that postmenopausal women weren't marginal members of the group. They were among its hardest workers. They spent long hours in the heat breaking open hard ground to dig tubers that small children couldn't access on their own, and they fed those calories directly to their grandchildren. This freed their daughters to wean sooner, conceive again faster, and raise more children across a lifetime. The grandmother wasn't a dependent. She was the reason the whole system could accelerate. The data showed it clearly. In groups where grandmothers stayed active, grandchild survival rates went up. Not marginally, measurably. A woman who stopped reproducing and redirected that energy toward her grandchildren passed on more of her genes than a woman who didn't, because more of her bloodline survived. Over generations, that pressure built the trait into the species. Menopause isn't the body failing at reproduction. It's the body switching strategies, trading direct reproduction for something that turned out to be more effective, making sure the children already born actually made it. For the entire span of human existence, not one person raised a child by themselves. Not one. The structure was always the same, a rotating network of bodies, a group where the infant moved between hands, where someone was always awake, always close, always available to take over. The average mother in a hunter-gatherer band had somewhere between 5 and 15 people actively involved in raising each child. Not occasionally, not during emergencies, but every day as the ordinary baseline of how life worked. In most industrialized countries today, that number is 2, often 1. That isn't progress. That's a 300,000-year-old survival system running on a fraction of the inputs it was built for. The biology didn't update to fit the floor plan. The infant in the next room tonight still needs exactly what infants have always needed. Constant proximity to other bodies, years of feeding, a group that treats its survival as a shared project. Those needs didn't shrink because the house got walls. What changed is that we built an entire social architecture around the assumption that 2 people, or 1, could absorb all of it, declared it the normal way to raise a child, and then called it a personal failure when people broke under the weight. For 300,000 years, one person trying to raise a child alone wasn't a hard situation. It was a death sentence for the child. The fact that modern parents survive it, barely, on no sleep, in isolation, often without anyone checking on them, isn't evidence that it works. It's evidence of how much damage a person can absorb before they stop functioning. The 3 a.m. moment every new parent knows, that specific combination of exhaustion and total silence, the infant still screaming, the walls pressing in, no one coming, that isn't a modern inconvenience. It's a biological alarm. Your nervous system is registering an absence that has meant catastrophe for every human who ever lived before you. The cooperative breeding system, the alloparents, the grandmothers, the rotating arms, none of it existed because it was emotionally satisfying. It existed because the math never worked any other way, and your body still knows that. For 300,000 years, the group not being there meant the child was in danger. It still feels that way because, for almost all of human history, it was.